Well, that's my morning's milking done for today. That Mabel, she can be a little bit of a diva, especially if she knows she's being photographed. She gives us 2 liters a day. So she gives us a liter in the morning and a liter in the evening. Now, her barn companion across the other stall is Alice, and she's what they call a maiden milker. And that means she's not actually had any kids, but she spontaneously started producing milk. Now, I know that sounds a little bit strange, but that's what some of the dairy breeds do apparently. Now, she gives us about a liter a day, and so that means in total we've got about 3 liters of milk a day. And for Bob and I, actually, that's just too much milk to drink, and we can't really sell it without going through all sorts of legal requirements and things. So I'm making cheese, and I've started by making things like paneer, which is like the simplest, most basic form of cheese, using some sort of vinegar or lemon juice to kind of separate the curds and wheys. And then we've progressed on to soft, fresh chev, which is a spreadable, more tasty kind of cheese that you can season with different herbs and salt and garlic. But you eat it fresh. It's a bit like Boursin or cream cheese a little bit. And then we're also making things like the rinded cheeses, which are a little bit like brie or camembert. So they're a little bit smellier, but they're more interesting in flavour. They taste really, really good, and they're delicious with crusty bread and olives and tomatoes, as is the chev. Finally, I'm experimenting with making a goat's milk cheddar. Now that's more time consuming and complicated to make. Well, not really complicated, but it's a longer process because you have to age the cheese. And I'm going to just give you a very brief rundown on the different steps that we go through to make the cheddar cheese. I'm using 2 sachets of mesophilic culture. Each sachet is good for 4 liters of milk, and as I'm using 8 liters of goat's milk, this is perfect. There are cheaper ways of buying mesophilic culture. You can get great big sort of sachets of it that do sort of 1,000,000 liters of milk, but I've only got a couple of goats who are actually milking for me. As this has got a shelf life, this works out cheaper for me. When your milk is up to temperature, that's 86 degrees Fahrenheit, 35, 36 centigrade, sprinkle your mesophilic culture and let it rehydrate for about 5 minutes before stirring it in. So just put a lid on and wait 5 minutes. So now you stir in your mesophilic culture, and you stir it thoroughly, and you're going to let it sit for 30 minutes to acidify in preparation for adding your rennet. Now, the mesophilic culture helps to acidify the milk and give it some flavour. I'm now going to put 10 drops of vegetable rennet into the milk, and you can dilute it into a 1/4 cup of water, but I'm putting it directly in. I've not had any trouble doing that so far. And you're going to stir it carefully, and then you're going to cover it and let it rest for an hour. I'm going to retain the heat by covering my pot with a nice crocheted blanket. Just make sure you do not turn on your gas hob, otherwise your kitchen might catch on fire and that would be a disaster for your cheese making. Right, this is a slightly speeded up video of me cutting the curds after about an hour and 20 minutes of letting it rest. So you make vertical cuts with a palette knife or a sharp knife, and then you make horizontal cuts across. You're basically cutting the curds into cubes. You can go over it again and make the cubes slightly smaller. And then basically, when you've done that, you're going to put the lid back on and let the curds do what they call heal slightly for about 10 minutes. The next step is to heat the curds up to about 98 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or 38 to 40 degrees centigrade. Do this very slowly and stir the curds. You need to cook these curds for about half an hour at that temperature before you can do the next step. Next, you're going to scoop out some of the whey just to make getting the curds out a little bit more manageable. Okay, we're now going to salt the curds, and I'm going to use 3 tablespoons of fine sea salt. It sounds like a lot of salt, but actually a lot of it's going to come out in the whey, which it's going to help to drain. So you stir it in really, really well. Make sure it all gets incorporated. And then you're going to let it sit and kind of do its thing for a few minutes before moving on to the next step. Now comes the exciting bit. I've taken a cheese mold, which is full of holes, and I'm lining it with some cheesecloth, and I'm going to fill the cheesecloth and mold with the curds. Make sure you fill it up right to the top, because quite a lot of this is going to condense once you put the weights on and put the whole thing into the cheese press. So fill it up, press it down with your spoon, and we'll get on to the next step. Now you're going to tuck your cheese curds in with the cheesecloth. That's basically just fold the edges over. Now comes the tricky business of putting the follower, that's the lid on the top of the cheese mold, under the cheese press without everything tipping out. That's the follower. Now you've got to put a block inside the follower and put it all under the cheese press and put your little wooden blocks in, which seem to represent 20 pounds of pressure. I'm never quite sure how that works. It's a little bit fiddly doing this. Got to get it directly underneath and turn those wing nuts to tighten everything out, and you can see the whey starting to drain out. And as the cheese compresses, you can continue turning those wing nuts. Now we're going to put that there for an hour or so for the initial compression. Right, now it's time to take the cheese out and turn it over and put it back in the mold and press it again. See the uneven edges there? That will help to rectify those uneven edges. So you turn it over, you put the cheesecloth back, tuck it back in, but this time you're going to put more weight on it, and I'm going to leave it overnight to really squeeze out the last of the whey. Right, I'm going to put the fresh cheese onto a little rack in a baking tray.
Okay, so I've had this cheese draining in
and
the
we're going to let
cheese
it
press
air
overnight,
dry
and
for a couple
it's
of days.
time now.
But before we do that, look at that. That's not too bad actually. Not perfect, but you know, it's gonna shrink a little bit more. I'm going to get some sea salt and just sprinkle all the surfaces with sea salt before letting it air dry. So just sprinkle it on the top, the sides and the bottom, and put it in a cool room with the door shut, not let your cats and dogs get to it, and you're going to flip it every 6 hours or so. So here we are a couple of days later. These cheeses have air dried for a couple of days with sea salt sprinkled on top of them. Oh yes, there's another cheese there. I had more curds than I had space for in the cheese on the left, so I made another one. And now I'm going to coat it with some cheese wax, which I'm going to melt in a special saucepan dedicated just for the cheese wax, because I'll never be able to boil potatoes in there again, will I? This seems the longest bit of the process, melting the cheese wax. I've got it in a sort of double boiler setup on low heat, and you do have to take a little bit of time with it. You don't want to rush it, you don't want to burn anything, you don't want to set your kitchen on fire, so just be patient. Right, having done the sides, you can now rest it in your parchment paper lined tray and take your brush and brush the top. This wax dries quite quickly, so it does not take very long. I think the longest bit of this part is melting the wax
But once it's melted, applying it to the cheese is fairly quick.
So you're nearly done, but you may find that there's little bits that maybe you've missed, or when they've dried, they've cracked open. Don't be afraid to put another coat of wax on, or to fix a little bit of cracks in the sides of the cheese wax. Honestly, it will not hurt the cheese to do a little bit extra waxing on there. And then you've just got to wait a couple of months for the cheese to mature. And you can put them in your fridge, or if you're lucky enough to have a cheese cave, put it in your cheese cave. And that's got an ideal temperature of between 11 and 15 degrees centigrade. Now in a couple of months we'll come back and we'll taste one of these cheeses and see how we got on. Until next time, stay warm and stay safe. And if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the little bell so that you're notified of any new videos that I make. See you soon. Thanks again.